The sugar mill didn't just steal Maeve's clean air, they dumped 2,000 tons of rotting cane waste right on her property line, a towering, suffocating monument to corporate greed. They expected the stench to break her. Instead, she took their trash and grew an empire from the dirt up. The smell was the first thing to hit you. It wasn't the sweet, caramelized scent of sugar the tourists expected when they drove through the valley. It was a dense, sour fermentation, like vinegar soaked into old cardboard and left to bake in the August sun. Maeve Hayes woke up to it every morning. She smelled it in the fibers of her bedsheets. She tasted it in her morning coffee. Stepping out onto the porch of her farmhouse, the source of the stench dominated the horizon. A grey-brown mountain of bagasse, the fibrous pulp left over after sugarcane stalks are crushed. The Red Line Sugar Company sat just a mile up the road, its corrugated steel silos gleaming like fresh money. For 3 years, their dump trucks had been reversing right up to the rusted barbed wire that separated Red Line's sprawling industrial footprint from Maeve's 40 acres of struggling soybean and corn. They dumped the waste, thousands of tons of it. It formed a jagged ridge that blocked the morning sun from Maeve's eastern fields. Technically, the pile was on Red Line's side of the property line. Legally, the county zoning board called it a temporary agricultural byproduct storage facility. In reality, it was a middle finger, a calculated, grinding war of attrition to force Maeve to sell her grandfather's land for pennies on the dollar. Maeve walked down the porch steps, her work boots crunching on the dry, compacted dirt of the yard. She was 32, with a permanent sunburn across the bridge of her nose, and hands calloused like dried leather. She didn't have the luxury of giving up. The bank held the mortgage, and the soil held everything she knew. She walked toward the eastern fence line. The heat was already rising, pulling a visible haze of humidity off the bagasse pile. The waste was decomposing unevenly. The core of the massive pile was anaerobic, starved of oxygen, breeding acidic sludge that leached a dark, rusty liquid into the ditch bordering Maeve's property. She knelt by the ditch. The water was black, stagnant, dead. "Morning, Hayes." Maeve didn't flinch. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her denim thighs. Idling on the dirt access road on the other side of the fence was a pristine, white Ford F250. The window rolled down, blasting a pocket of refrigerated air into the humid morning. Thomas Greer leaned out. He was the regional operations manager for Red Line, a man who wore pressed khakis to a dirt job. "Greer," Maeve said. Her voice was flat, carrying no more energy than was strictly necessary. "Looks like the runoff is getting a little heavy," Greer observed, adjusting his mirrored sunglasses. He looked at her dead, black ditch, then up at her yellowing rows of soybeans in the distance. The acidic leaching was killing the pH of her soil. He knew it. She knew it. "You know, the offer's still on the table. Red Line will buy the tract, above market rate for failing farmland. You could move to the city. Get a job that doesn't ruin your back." "The offer is a joke," Maeve said. "And the zoning board meets next Tuesday. I've got the soil samples. Your pile is leaching toxic tannins into the local water table." Greer smiled. It was a small, tight expression that didn't reach his eyes. "The board is chaired by Mayor Higgins, whose brother runs our logistics fleet. Don't waste your gas driving to the courthouse, Maeve. It's a temporary storage pile. Perfectly legal. We'll move it eventually." He rolled the window up. The tinted glass slid shut, cutting off his face, and the truck crunched away down the gravel road, kicking up a plume of white dust that settled over Maeve's boots. She stood there for a long time, looking at the mountain of rot. She was losing. The ledgers on her kitchen table were an ocean of red ink. Fertilizer prices had spiked 50% in the last 18 months. Diesel was burning a hole in her checking account every time she fired up the old John Deere tractor. Her topsoil was exhausted, drained by decades of conventional farming, turning to fine dust that blew away in the dry season and compacted into concrete when it rained. And right next to her dying farm sat a mountain of organic matter, wasted, rotting, poisoning her. That night, it rained. A heavy, torrential summer downpour that turned the world into a drum. Maeve sat at the formica table in her kitchen, nursing a glass of cheap bourbon. Through the window, illuminated by the flashes of lightning, she watched the pile. The rain hit the bagasse, and the sheer weight of the water caused the eastern edge of the mountain to slump. A minor avalanche of black, stinking sludge slid through the barbed wire fence. It buried a quarter-acre of her newly planted winter wheat under 2 feet of toxic, fermenting mush. Maeve didn't cry. She had run out of tears when the bank sent the second foreclosure warning 3 months ago. Instead, a cold, hard knot tightened in her chest. She poured the bourbon down the sink. The next morning, Maeve walked out to the quarter-acre of buried wheat. The sludge was ankle-deep, smelling of sulfur and decay. She drove a shovel into it. The blade slid through the mess with a wet, heavy sound. She lifted a mound of the stuff and brought it close to her face. It was acidic. It was locking up nutrients. It was killing her seeds. But it was also carbon. Pure, unadulterated, fibrous carbon. Maeve went back to the house. She pulled out a milk crate filled with her grandfather's old agronomy textbooks from the 70s, long before synthetic fertilizers became the only answer anyone trusted. She opened her laptop and pulled up dry, dense, agricultural extension papers from universities 3 states away. She read until her eyes burned, and the sun went down. Bagasse is high in carbon. The ratio is astronomically unbalanced, sometimes 100 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. When you dump it on a field, the soil microbes go into overdrive trying to break down the carbon. To do that, they need nitrogen. They steal every ounce of available nitrogen from the surrounding dirt, starving whatever plants are trying to grow. That's why it killed her wheat. It wasn't just the acid, it was a nutrient vacuum. But if you balanced it, if you fed the pile the nitrogen it desperately craved and introduced oxygen, the microbes wouldn't steal from the soil. They would devour the cane waste, breaking it down, rapidly transforming the rigid, useless fibers into humus. Rich, dark, nutrient-dense compost. Black gold. Redline wasn't just dumping trash on her border. They were dumping raw, unrefined energy. They were too blind, too bureaucratic, and too corporate to see it. Maeve didn't have money for commercial nitrogen, but she knew someone who had a waste problem of his own. She drove her battered pickup 20 miles across the county to Jason Henderson's poultry farm. Henderson ran 3 massive broiler houses. He was constantly fighting the county over the smell and disposal of chicken litter, a potent mixture of manure, feathers, and spilled feed. "Jason," Maeve said, leaning against his barn door as he power-washed a tractor. "How much are you paying to haul the litter off to the county dump?" He cut the engine. "Too damn much. Hauling fees went up again?" "I'll take it," Maeve said. "All of it. If you truck it to my place, I'll let you dump it for half of what the county charges." Henderson wiped his forehead with a greasy rag, eyeing her skeptically. "That's a lot of shit, Maeve. Literally. What are you going to do with it?" "I'm starting a chemistry experiment." 2 days later, the first dump truck of chicken litter arrived. Maeve directed them to a barren stretch of dirt behind her machine shed, out of sight from the main road. Then, she fired up her front-end loader. She drove to the property line. Redline's bagasse pile had spilled onto her land. That made it hers. She dropped the bucket, drove the steel teeth hard into the slumping mountain of cane waste, and ripped out a massive chunk. The engine whined, blowing black smoke from the exhaust stack as she reversed, carrying a cubic yard of corporate trash back to her shed. She worked until midnight, driven by a cynical, desperate energy. She layered the materials, a foot of acidic, carbon-heavy bagasse, a few inches of nitrogen-rich, burning-hot chicken manure, another layer of bagasse. She added water from her irrigation hose. She built a windrow, a long, triangular pile about 6 feet high and 20 feet long. For the next 3 weeks, Maeve barely slept. Composting at a commercial scale isn't just letting things rot. It's farming microbes. It requires precision. Every morning, she took a 3-foot-long temperature probe and drove it deep into the heart of the pile. Day 3, 110 degrees. Day 5, 145 degrees. The pile was cooking. The thermophilic bacteria had woken up, gorging on the nitrogen from the manure and tearing into the stubborn carbon bonds of the cane fiber. When the temperature crept toward 160 degrees, dangerously close to killing the beneficial microbes and turning to ash, Maeve climbed into her tractor. She drove the loader into the pile, lifting, turning, and aerating the material. Steam billowed into the cold morning air in massive white clouds. The sour vinegar smell of the raw bagasse was gone, replaced by a sharp, pungent ammonia scent that slowly, day by day, began to mellow. It was brutal, bone-jarring work. The hydraulic lines on her tractor blew twice. She spent her evenings covered in grease, patching hoses in the dark. Her back ached. Her bank account dwindled to double digits. Greer drove by twice a week, slowing his white truck just enough to watch her tear into the spilled edge of his mountain. He thought she was just trying to clean up the mess. He thought she was losing. Week 6. The steam had stopped. The temperature in the pile dropped to a steady 90 degrees and stayed there. The curing phase. Maeve walked out to the windrow without her gloves. She dug her bare hands into the pile. The fibrous yellow-grey cane trash was gone. The sharp, burning chicken manure was gone. What remained was dark, crumbly, and cool. It stuck to the ridges of her fingerprints. She brought a handful up to her nose. It smelled like a forest floor after a spring rain. Deep, earthy, and intensely alive. She had done it. She had forced a marriage between 2 toxic waste products and birthed something entirely new. Maeve took the compost and spread it thick over a single acre of her worst, most depleted soil. Ground that was basically compacted sand and clay. She tilled it in. She planted a late crop of bush beans just to see what would happen. Nature didn't hesitate. Within days, the seeds broke the surface. But they didn't look like her usual crops, pale, struggling, fighting for every inch. These leaves were a deep, vibrant, unnatural green. They exploded out of the earth, thick-stemmed and aggressive. The bagasse compost wasn't just feeding them nutrients. It had rebuilt the soil structure, acting like a sponge that held moisture in the blistering afternoon heat. Maeve stood at the edge of the test plot, a cup of coffee in her hand, watching the deep green leaves flutter in the wind. She looked past her thriving acre, up toward the property line. The towering mountain of Redline's bagasse loomed in the distance. Greer saw it as trash. He saw it as a weapon to break her. Maeve took a sip of her coffee. A hard, dangerous smile touched the corners of her mouth. She didn't see a mountain of trash anymore. She saw a free, unlimited supply of raw materials, and she was going to take every last ounce of it. The bush beans yielded 3 times the county average. Maeve didn't celebrate. She harvested them, sold them to a regional distributor, and drove straight to the First National Bank. She walked into the loan officer's cubicle smelling of diesel and sweat, slammed a jar of her black compost onto his desk, and laid out her yield sheets. She asked for $50,000. The loan officer balked. Maeve pointed to the jar, explained the chemistry of bagasse and poultry litter, and outlined her operational costs. She didn't ask for a favor. She presented a math equation that the bank couldn't refute. She got the loan. The interest rate was predatory, but she didn't care. She had capital. Maeve bought a used tow-behind compost turner from an equipment auction in Ohio. It was a massive, rusted piece of steel machinery that hooked to the power takeoff shaft of her tractor. Its heavy steel drum was lined with flails designed to shred and aerate windrows in a single pass. She also bought a larger front-end loader and signed a binding, year-long contract with Jason Henderson to take every pound of chicken litter his broiler houses produced. Then, the real work began. Every night, under the glare of halogen work lights, Maeve attacked the mountain. Redline kept dumping their waste. Their trucks reversed to the property line day after day, releasing avalanches of wet, fibrous cane pulp. And every night, Maeve's loader bit into the base of the pile that spilled onto her side of the fence. She was a parasite living off a corporate host, stealing their refuse by the ton. She established a rhythm. Haul the bagasse. Dump it in long rows across her fallow fields. Cap it with Henderson's chicken manure. Wet it down. Drive the tractor over the rows, letting the massive steel flails of the turner violently mix the elements. The air behind her machine shed became a dense fog of steam and ammonia. The thermometer probes dictated her life. Turn at 160 degrees. Let it rest at 90. Screen the finished product. Spread it on the fields. Repeat. She operated on 4 hours of sleep a night. Her knuckles were permanently stained black. The cab of her tractor became her living room, littered with empty coffee thermoses and grease rags. But as autumn turned into a bitter, freezing winter, the landscape of her 40 acres began to fundamentally change. By March, she had processed 600 tons of Redline's trash. When spring planting arrived, Maeve didn't buy a single bag of synthetic fertilizer. She didn't buy anhydrous ammonia. She didn't buy liquid phosphorus. She relied entirely on the thousands of yards of black gold she had painstakingly manufactured. She planted corn. By late June, the results were impossible to ignore. The surrounding farms, battered by an unusually dry spring, featured stunted, yellowing stalks struggling to pull moisture from the hardened clay. Maeve's corn stood 8 feet tall. The stalks were thick as baseball bats, the leaves a dark, almost bruised shade of green. The soil beneath the canopy was soft, spongy, and teeming with earthworms. The compost had increased her soil's organic matter from a dead 1% to a staggering 5%. Her land was holding water like a reservoir. People started to notice. Other farmers slowed their pickups as they drove past her property. The regional agronomist stopped by unannounced, asking to take soil cores. And inevitably, Thomas Greer noticed. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Maeve was in the machine shed, violently hammering a bent shear pin out of the compost turner when the pristine white F250 pulled into her yard. Greer stepped out. He wasn't wearing his mirrored sunglasses. He looked at the massive windrows steaming in the background, then at the heavy machinery. Finally, he looked toward the eastern fence line. The mountain of bagasse was no longer a towering threat. The side facing Maeve's property was sheared off, a clean, vertical cliff face of rotting fiber. She had mined it clean to the property line, and had even started reaching the bucket of her loader through the rusted barbed wire to scoop out more. "You're stealing from the Redline Sugar Company," Greer said. His voice lacked its usual corporate smugness. It was tight, defensive. Maeve lowered the hammer. She wiped a streak of grease from her cheek with the back of her wrist. "I'm cleaning up a toxic spill. You dumped it on my side of the fence, Greer. That makes it my problem." "You reached over the line, Hayes. I have drone footage. You are actively excavating company property. Maeve let out a harsh, rasping laugh. Company property. 6 months ago you called it a temporary agricultural byproduct. You said it was waste. Which is it, Thomas? Is it valuable company inventory, or is it an illegal garbage dump? Greer's jaw clenched. It's proprietary biomass. We have internal protocols for its eventual utilization. You don't have the right to process it. Then keep it on your side of the fence, Maeve fired back, stepping out of the shade of the shed. Build a retaining wall. But if a single ounce of that rotting sludge crosses my property line, I will take it. And if you try to sue me for stealing your garbage, I will subpoena the EPA and have them test the groundwater beneath your proprietary biomass. Greer looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the dark bags under her eyes, the sheer, unyielding muscle of her forearms, and the cold deadpan of her stare. She wasn't a desperate, failing farmer anymore. She was a heavily armed adversary standing on a fortress of black dirt. This isn't over, Maeve. You don't get to mock the zoning board and steal our raw materials. He got back into his truck, slamming the door. Maeve watched him drive away. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She picked up the heavy steel hammer. She had just threatened a multi-million-dollar corporation with the EPA. The game had escalated, and she was out of chips. The summons to the county zoning board arrived via certified mail 3 days later. Red Line Sugar Company versus Hayes Farms. The official complaint cited unauthorized removal and processing of industrial assets. They weren't trying to fine her. They were asking the county to issue an immediate cease and desist order and demand restitution for the stolen bagasse. It was a strategic kill shot. If she couldn't take the waste, her fertilizer supply vanished. If they forced her to pay restitution, she would default on her high-interest equipment loan. The meeting was held in the stuffy, wood-paneled basement of the county courthouse. The air conditioning was broken, and the room smelled of old paper and nervous sweat. Mayor Higgins sat at the center of the raised dais, flanked by 4 local businessmen who all had indirect ties to Red Line's payroll. Greer sat at the plaintiff's table, with a lawyer wearing a suit that cost more than Maeve's truck. Maeve sat alone. She wore her cleanest pair of jeans and a button-down shirt that pinched her shoulders. In front of her was a thick manila folder. "Ms. Hayes," Mayor Higgins started, peering over his reading glasses. "The complaint alleges you have systematically removed hundreds of tons of material from the Red Line facility over the past 8 months. Material that does not belong to you. Material that spilled onto my property, Mr. Mayor," Maeve corrected, her voice steady in the quiet room. Red Line's lawyer stood up. He was smooth, polished, and deadly. "The fact that the material temporarily shifted due to weather events does not transfer ownership, Ms. Hayes. You deliberately purchased heavy machinery to exploit Red Line's assets for your own commercial gain. We estimate the value of the removed biomass at $40,000. We are asking the board for an immediate injunction." The board members nodded in unison. The fix was in. Maeve didn't panic. She opened her manila folder. She didn't pull out legal precedents. She pulled out a stack of laminated photographs and environmental test results. 2 years ago, Maeve said, standing up and sliding the photos across the table to the board, I complained to this exact committee about the toxic runoff from that pile. You dismissed it. You called it a temporary storage issue. She slid a second piece of paper forward. This is an independent water and soil analysis from the ditch dividing our properties, taken last week where the pile is undisturbed. The tannin levels and acidity are a direct violation of state environmental statutes regarding agricultural waste. It is actively poisoning the local watershed. Greer frowned. This board isn't the EPA, Hayes. No, it's not, Maeve agreed, looking directly at Greer. But the State Agricultural Commission is, and they love media attention. She pulled out a final document. It was a formal, drafted complaint to the State Department of Environmental Quality, completely filled out and ready to be filed. "Here is the reality of the situation," Maeve said, turning her back to the board and addressing Greer and his lawyer. "You produce a waste product you don't know how to handle. To dispose of it legally, you would have to truck it out of county to a certified industrial composting facility. I checked the rates. It would cost Redline roughly $120 a ton in hauling and tipping fees." The lawyer's eye twitched. Maeve had done her homework. "You generate about 4,000 tons of bagasse a year," Maeve continued, doing the math out loud. "That's nearly $500,000 in disposal costs you've been avoiding by using your property line as an illegal dumping ground." Silence fell over the basement room. The hum of the broken AC unit seemed deafening. "If you want an injunction," Maeve said, her voice dropping to a hard, low register, "take it. I will stop touching your pile, and tomorrow morning I will file this complaint with the state. The EPA will mandate a full cleanup of your site. You will pay the $500,000 in disposal fees, plus the state fines, plus the cost of remediating the groundwater." She let the threat hang in the stagnant air. She watched Greer calculate the numbers in his head. She watched the lawyer realize they had walked into a trap. "Or," Maeve said, offering the alternative, "we can enter a contract." Mayor Higgins cleared his throat, looking nervous. "A contract? I am a certified, functioning commercial composting operation," Maeve lied smoothly. "I have the equipment and the capacity. Redline will formally classify the bagasse as industrial waste. You will deliver it to my facility, meaning you drop it on the concrete pad I am going to build behind my shed, instead of dumping it on the fence line, and you will pay me a processing fee of $30 a ton." Greer stood up. "You want us to pay you to take the material you've been stealing? I am offering you a 75% discount on your legal disposal costs," Maeve countered, staring him down. "I am solving a logistical nightmare that is about to cost your company its operating margins. It's a bargain, Thomas. Take it." The board members looked at Greer's lawyer. The lawyer looked at Greer. No one spoke for a long, agonizing minute. The bluff was immense, but Maeve held the cards, and the state fines were an undeniable reality. Greer slowly sat back down. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, suddenly looking very tired. $30 a ton is extortion. 25, Maeve said, and you pave my access road so your trucks don't ruin my suspension. The lawyer leaned over, whispering furiously into Greer's ear. Greer rubbed his temples, staring at the drafted EPA complaint resting on the table. "Fine," Greer said, his voice clipped and bitter. "We will draft the vendor agreement by Friday." Maeve didn't smile. She just packed up her folder. "Make sure the check's clear on the 1st of the month." Greer. By late October, the harvest was over. The massive combine harvester had rolled through Maeve's fields, churning out record-breaking yields of corn. The bank was paid off. The equipment loan was secured. Maeve stood on her back porch, a hot mug of coffee in her hand. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp, clean scent of autumn. She looked out over her grandfather's 40 acres. The soil was resting, insulated under a thick layer of cover crops and fresh, dark compost. To the east, the property line was clear. The jagged, rotting mountain of corporate waste was gone. Instead, a steady stream of Redline dump trucks rolled down her newly paved access road. They didn't stop at the fence. They drove right up to her massive concrete receiving pad, dumping the raw cane fiber exactly where she told them to, and every month they paid her for the privilege. Jason Henderson's chicken trucks arrived on Tuesdays. The massive compost turner sat waiting under a new steel pole barn. Maeve took a sip of her coffee. The exhaustion was still there, deep in her bones, a permanent companion to the farming life. but the desperate, suffocating fear of losing the land was gone. She hadn't just survived the corporate machine. She had bolted a yoke to its neck and made it pull her plough. The land was alive. The soil was black. And the ledger on her kitchen table was finally, permanently, written in black ink. When the world gives you toxic waste, don't just complain. Compost it. Maeve didn't just save her farm. She forced the very corporation trying to ruin her to fund her empire. If this story of raw, cynical resilience hit home for you, hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is aggressive success, and subscribe for more stories of people beating the system from the dirt up. See you in the next one.